Did you know the Ancestral Kitchen podcast has a thriving online community? Patreon members love our private group discussion forum, away from the noise of mainstream social media. In this group, conversations brim with ideas, recipes, humor, and thoughtful discussion of member questions. There's a bonus exclusive podcast where Allison and I answer member questions and talk more informally about our kitchens and our lives. This private podcast also includes aftershow tidbits with guests, everything we didn't dare say on the main feed, and all the extra stuff we couldn't fit into the primary episodes. There's a monthly live chat where we get together with members, and afterwards the recording goes up in the private podcast feed for members to listen in later. Come and be a part of a group that will befriend, encourage, and support you and your kitchen endeavors. We'd love to have you join us. Find all the details at ancestralkitchenpodcast.com.
What foods will you find in an ancestral pantry in a modern world kitchen? Today, Allison and I will share some of the foods we store in our pantries to keep our regional, from-scratch meals on the table on a daily basis, as well as talk about modern tools that help us to turn some inexpensive bulk raw products into value-added products. We will travel back in time to visit ancient and old pantries and look at what people were eating and how they were storing it. And we will also talk about ancient tools, some of which we still use today. Supporters of the pod can check their private podcast feed for an after show where I ask Allison to share some of the foods she used to keep in her pantry before ancestral food. And I share some of mine as well. And everyone can check the show notes on this episode for some of my favorite resources for reading about pantries and food in times past.
Welcome to the Ancestral Kitchen Podcast.
I'm Alison, a European town dweller living in England.
And I'm Andrea, living on a family farm in Northwest Washington State, USA.
Pull up a chair at the table and join us as we talk about eating, cooking, and living with ancestral food wisdom in a modern world kitchen. Hello, Andrea.
Hello, Allison. How are you today?
How's
doing your voice
okay
this morning?
Yeah, it's touch and go. It's okay as long as I don't start coughing. Then it's not okay. So we'll see how it goes this morning. Rob might have to cut out the odd cough. We'll see. How about you? How are you?
I'm doing well. You know, it's interesting thinking about how much we record, how actually very few interruptions we've had for lack of voice. It's actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it's kind of impressive. So it's rare for us to have that. So
yeah, I agree. Have you had some breakfast this morning or not?
No, I didn't have breakfast. I have a mug of boza with me.
Ooh,
So I thought, wait a minute, if I can't grab a breakfast, this is probably the perfect thing to just take and get started with. But last night we had I don't know what you want to call it, one of those dinners where you suddenly say, wow, it's dinner time, and I didn't make up my mind.
I haven't done anything.
So I put a pound of ground sausage in one pan, and then in another, in a large Dutch oven, I had some lard. I was thinking it was tallow, but it was actually lard. I had some lard on the counter, and I greased a pan, and then I just started dicing things and throwing them in. You know how you do. So I had a celery root. I cut a beet into matchsticks because that felt fun for some reason.
Yeah, it always takes longer to cook as well, the beetroot. So you've got to kind of do them small.
Yeah. And then we have these purple potatoes. I'm trying to remember the name of them. I want to say Amorosa or something like that. They're the only ones that are available right now. So they're the ones we're eating. And then I had a small cabbage. And so I kind of cubed everything up and just kept throwing it in the pan and salting it and eating it while I was standing there because I was hungry and it was so good. And then I kind of drained the sausage a bit and then threw the crumbled sausage in, and
delicious.
there was dinner. So it happened like that.
Simple and really, really tasty. There's so much good winter veg still around here. We had celeriac, which is celery root, last night, and squash as well. And I decided to put juniper on it, which I've never done before because I'm on a juniper kick, kind of getting ideas for juniper.
Juniper berries or what?
Yeah, the berries, and I crushed them in a mortar and pestle. They were dried. And I put in a little bit of ginger, a little bit of white pepper, which I'm crazy over at the moment, and some of the garlic salt that Amelia, the patron, made for me out of garlic scapes and salt.
Stop, Alison.
It's really good.
Last night I opened a jar for the salt. A friend made me a jar of garlic scape salt, and I literally put that in.
Oh, wow. It's really good.
So that's pretty specific.
Once you start, you can't stop with that, I think. But
I agree.
Delicious, delicious. Indeed.
Wow. Well, that sounds like a good, cozy dinner. And I am looking forward to it. I was thinking for breakfast, I'm going to heat it up and then I want to fry an egg and put it on top.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Roast vegetables with egg on the top are lovely.
Yes.
Do you want me to tell you what I ate before we came on or not? I told you about what I ate last night.
That wasn't it.
Okay, that was what we had last night. No, it's quite interesting and also quite illustrative of our kitchen somewhat. We had a friend over on Sunday who wanted to cook with me, wanted to cook together because she's a cook. She has cooked for like big groups of people. She used to regularly cook for like 150 people on a Friday at a place here in Stroud. And we wanted to just come up with something we hadn't cooked before and we could just make something up. So we ended up with beef and beetroot burgers, which was delicious, like grated beet in with the beef. And we chose paprika and rosemary and thyme to mix in with it, and salt and pepper, obviously. And we had that with a salad from the market, and we made a kind of a dipping sauce with sheep sugar and lots of herbs and some onions that I'd soaked a little bit in vinegar beforehand. It was absolutely delicious. Gable made a spelt focaccia, which everyone but me ate because I'm gluten-free at the moment. But it was a beautiful, beautiful platter. But we had so many burgers that today's Tuesday and there was still burgers left over. So yesterday we had the burgers for lunch.
She only knows how to cook for a lot. I love
exactly.
it.
Like 150 burgers. And then today, because of the histamine thing, I tend to eat foods the next day, but not the day after. So the burgers, there were 4 burgers left. They're quite small. So Gabriel and Rob had the burgers for lunch left over. And I cooked some cabbage with onion in stock. So I'm just kind of boiling it in the stock. And it's just absolutely delicious when you use stock instead of water. But because I wasn't partaking of the burgers, I thought here was an opportunity for me to make something with eggs, which Gabriel obviously can't eat. And I've been reading Too Many Eggs, the book by Mimi Smith-Dvorak, who I'm hoping to interview in a week or so's time. And I'm reading it, and even if I'm full, my mouth is watering literally at the recipes. I was like, but I want to do all of them. But it's so hard because Gabriel doesn't really eat eggs, nor does Rob. So it's just me. So I thought, well, as it's just me, let's take advantage of this. Yeah. So I made a Spanish tortilla, which is not what you would imagine coming from America and hearing the word tortilla, because it's like a frittata. So it's an egg-based vegetable dish. I got the mandolin out and put mandolin some potatoes into really thin slices, and then mandolin a couple of onions, and fried them in the cast iron pan. And when they were kind of going a bit brown and crispy, I poured beaten eggs with some spices and herbs and that over the top. And then the difference, apparently, as I've learned from this Too Many Eggs books, between an Italian frittata and a Spanish tortilla is that the frittata usually gets put in the oven halfway through cooking. So you start it on the stove, and then to get the top, you broil it or grill it, is what we call it in the UK. But the Spanish tortilla is done on the stove the whole way through. So I ended up putting a little lid on our cast iron pan to kind of keep the heat in, and then just left it cooking on really, really low. And I had that with the cabbage instead of the leftover burgers, and it was really nice. And I didn't feel guilty that because Gabriel loved the burgers, he was quite happy, and I could have eggs and potatoes, the two things that he doesn't eat. And I've got loads of leftovers, so I can have it for breakfast tomorrow. So yeah, absolutely delicious.
That sounds wonderful. Where you're going to have to tell me where in the book that is. Of course, I do everything on the stove if I can, just to not have to run.
Yeah, I think it's chapter
for the oven.
4 or 5. It's a chapter called Frittatas, Tortilla, and some other name for the similar thing from Mexico, I think.
Okay.
So yeah, there's a whole page and a half on what a tortilla is and how it's different from a frittata.
And
I'll
put that book in the show notes too, because it's an awesome.
It's in our usbookshop.org, our non-Amazon give to local bookstores online bookstore. I put it in there yesterday, so we should put the link to that in the show notes. And there's lots of other lovely books in there if people are interested. Anyway, that was my divergence.
Have a review. Yeah, all this food is. I can't say let's not talk about food anymore because that's actually what this episode's about.
Yes.
But this review from Erin Rosalita titled "My Favorite Podcast," and this was a 5-star review on Apple. So thank you for posting that review on Apple. And if you are listening to this and you want to leave a review on Apple as well, we will read it out on the air. So thank you for doing that.
Mm-hmm.
This review says, "This is hands down my favorite podcast. I'm a dietitian with a long-term interest in and appreciation for ancestral, heritage, and historical foodways. Allison and Andrea consistently address fascinating, compelling topics with nuance and sensitivity, curiosity, and intelligence. Thank you for sharing these conversations with us. Consider me one of your many devoted fans who is working to improve the health of the land and people around me. P.S. If you haven't already, purchase the cookbooks. They're a wealth of inspiration that also serve to support the podcast if you can't join the membership. Allison's Spelt Cookbook has revolutionized my bread baking, and for that, I am truly grateful."
Wow.
Whoa. Thank you. Wow.
Yes, thank you, Erin. How
that is an amazing review.
To hear that, and to hear the beautiful words you've chosen to express how you feel. That means a lot to us for sure. And wow, I'm so glad that the Spelt Cookbook has influenced your bread baking that way, because that's what it's done to my kitchen for sure. And so that's passing on that energy in book form, which is kind of mission accomplished as far as I'm concerned.
And improving the health and the land around of the people in the land around you. That is
passing on the energy.
That is what this is all about. So that's wonderful.
Thank you.
Nailed it. My mom has been listening to the episodes. Hi, Mom. And she told me the other day that she's all caught up to current. So she was at my house yesterday and she wanted me to show her where in the shop to get the cookbooks and whatnot.
Okay.
So, I hope, Mom, you'll be enjoying them. She taught me narration and got me in the kitchen from, one of my very earliest memories is being in the kitchen. Then I told her, well, you can just thank yourself for
these books. Yeah.
For the podcast. So
totally.
Yeah. Good to know she's enjoying it. So we don't have a download for today's episode, but there will be a little after show. So let me tell you what we're going to talk about, Allison, and then you can tell me if you. So let me tell you what we're going to do in this show, and then I can tell you what I want to do for the after show, and you can tell me if you absolutely don't want to answer it.
Oh, okay. All right, I'm ready.
So first, I want to talk about some just historical bits of ancestral pantries, because that's what I love. How people were storing food and what they might be keeping.
Okay.
Just a couple different times in history. And then I want to talk about some of the tools our ancestors would have used in their kitchen, as well as tools that we in the modern day might be using to expand a pantry of non-pre-produced products and make them into value-added products in our own home. And then last, I want to talk about what you and I actually have in our pantries and
Okay.
how we store things in them. And if what I want to do in the after show is I was thinking about things that I used to keep in my pantry that I couldn't imagine my pantry being without, that you will not find on the property today. And so I wanted to ask you if there was things that you used to stock in a pantry that you no longer consider.
In my past
Gaps.
lives, you mean?
Yeah. So if you're game, then that's what I want to do. So that'll be an after show available for supporters of the podcast on our private podcast called The Kitchen Table. And we'll have fun with that one, I'm sure. There were some things that I kept on hand that might surprise some people. So let's go to a quick ad break and then come back in with the first topic.
Milling your own grain is all well and good until you learn it takes several hours leaning over a heavy stone quern just to produce enough flour for a few pancakes. Well, we say no to that. Enter mock mill, the modern and ancestral way of stone grinding your grain without an entire village of sisters at your beck and call. Learn about grinding your own grain and using it for baking by visiting ancestralkitchenpodcast.com/milling to read our Guide to Milling Your Own Flour. You will learn about surprising savings and health benefits from home grinding and why Allison has so heartily recommended the mock mill. Wait, mock mill does not give referral links. They simply look to see what website a customer traveled from when purchasing their mock mill and then give a generous referral to us in your name. If you are investing in a mock mill, please visit ancestralkitchenpodcast.com/milling to shop, and the referral does not cost you a thing. If a family member is purchasing a mock mill for you, after you promise to make them loaves of bread for the rest of their life in gratitude, then make sure they click ancestralkitchenpodcast.com/milling and travel directly to the mock mill link provided there to make their purchase. We are thankful for you remembering us when you shop, and we will raise a piece of toast in your honor.
I love reading books about food and history. I just really can't think of a better combination.
Snap.
Oh, so Erin, this one's going to be for you too, because it sounds like Erin does also. There's just something fascinating about seeing how people used to do things and how it evolved, and then looking at the forces that made it evolve over time. It's also really interesting to look at the things that really haven't changed. So
yeah,
I thought that would be a good way to start.
Can you, from your reading, because I know you've read very different books to me, I in the last 5 years have read a lot of books about oats and a lot of books about the British Isles, whereas that's meant that some of my wider reading has kind of taken a back seat. So can you give us some examples of pantries that you've read about in the past?
Yes. Okay. So I'm going to go back to ancient Egypt because we all have a little bit of ancient Egypt era love in our heart. And so around 3000 BC, we have some records of what people were eating. So I'm going to run through this list. In ancient Egypt, you might find a table set with such things as barley porridge, quail, kidneys, pigeon stew, fish, ribs of beef, cakes, stewed figs, fresh berries, cheese, wild celery, papyrus stalks, lotus roots, eel, mullet, carp, peach, tigerfish. Sure if I meant to typo on peach, but tigerfish and other species of fish that are actually unknown to us today, but we have maybe pictures or notes about them, but we don't actually know what they are. So they've presumably gone extinct. Small birds pickled in brine. Interestingly, they would pickle it in brine for a few days and then just eat it. There was no other preparation done. They salted their food and their mummies to dry, and they also dried food. So that was a form of preservation. And that's what the rich nobles were eating. The rest of us, Allison, us peasants down here at the bottom, we would have ale, onions, of course, a common flatbread called ta, and this would be purchased from vendors. There was also pork. despite government health warnings about pork, interestingly. The pork taboo in Egypt came around after about 1800 BC. But an interesting thing that I read, which harkens back to our pork episode, was that archaeologists were surprised to find that as late as 1350 BC, so quite some time after the pork taboos started being implemented, people were still raising pigs at home in kennels.
Gosh, so just breaking the law.
Which, yeah, I don't know if it was illegal or if people just thought maybe they shouldn't eat them. And so I found that to be interesting. And it also was interesting to me, and this kind of came up when we talked about the pork a little bit, that historically there was, when you read things like the book of Deuteronomy or something, there's a very strong interest in what is called clean food. So clean animals and things like that for spiritual reasons. And now I thought it was interesting that nowadays today, the catchphrase is once again clean food. We have a different definition, but there's this idea of purity through food somehow. And it's almost like now we're looking to our perfection of our body for our salvation and a long, if not an eternal life, which is a interesting thought. So I found that all very interesting. And Egyptian food doesn't sound that bad. I feel like I could.
It would be interesting to compare that to Roman food, because I've read quite a lot of Roman books, and it seems like there's some crossover and some not crossover. The barley's really kind of a staple, I think, all throughout Europe and down into Africa. Barley and barley porridge, because they found barley porridge, as we talked about in the porridge episode, in like the stomachs of men that they've dug up from peat bogs and that kind of thing. So I think barley porridge was really kind of ubiquitous. But that's fascinating. I didn't really know about Egypt, so thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, I also found some interesting details about people in Sumer, which I thought you might like to hear as well.
Oh, yes. Yeah, go ahead.
Anybody who's interested in ale always wants to hear about Sumer. So around 2400 BC, there are some texts with information in them about food. And not surprisingly, nobody was really cataloging what they ate every day and what the peasant class was up to. So we kind of have to find by inference or lists of things that were being delivered or sold or traded.
Yeah.
So what we've put together, and then of course there's also the archaeological evidence, but what we have put together, we meaning me reading the words on the page, Sumerian foods would include barley, wheat, millet, chickpeas, lentils, beans, onions, garlic, leeks, cucumbers, cress, mustard, fresh green lettuces, which probably don't look anything like what we're picturing as lettuce, but probably something closer to like a dandelion leaf, I would imagine. By the time the city of Babylon arose and kind of took over the culture there, truffles had been discovered. So we've got the exclusive fancy food. An everyday meal for us peasant class folk would look something like barley paste or barley cake with onions or with some beans and some barley ale. And fish was also really popular in Sumer. There's over 50 types mentioned in texts that are pre-2300 BC. And there was also fried fish vendors. And of course, instantly, I thought, yeah, fast food. We've always wanted fast food. And remembering that getting a fire going and having fuel for a fire and getting a lot of having containers that you could boil or fry or whatever things in, that's actually quite an accomplishment. So sort of centralizing it around a vendor who, then has the accumulated capital to run such a device, and then having, the people go out into the town and buy it on their walk to, I don't know, inscribe tablets or whatever people had jobs back then. On my way to carve the stela, just gonna pick up some fried fish. There was also vendors who sold onions, cucumbers, freshly grilled goat, mutton, and pork.
Gosh.
So this was interesting to me. Meat was more common in cities. But when they talked about the logic behind it, it did make sense. So if you butcher a large animal, it could be slaughtered and divided up or sold, shall we say, between people. Versus in the country, the population was very sparse and you're under the hot Near East sun and all of that. So if you butcher a large animal, everybody get to eating. It's not going to last very long. And so then, of course, that's also a big resource expenditure. And cattle also weren't raised for meat, but they were slaughtered at the end of their work life. And they were notoriously stringy and tough, with some very scathing comments written by people about how they were only fit for dogs to eat. Mutton was more common as a tender kind of a meat. And Herodotus infamously wrote about fat-tailed sheep, which sometimes I find modern historians to be quite full of themselves, and they all said, well, such a thing didn't exist. And then, of course, we have found that they did exist. Sorry, Herodotus, for doubting your word.
I think that
you ever gave us reason to.
A lot of the animal breeds were so different back then to how they are now. Just going back a few hundred years, and I read something like, Dorothy Hartley's Food in England, and she's talking about the different breeds of pigs and the different breeds of sheep. They're different to what we've got now. And talking about cattle and going back that far, I mean, cattle were so different back then to how they are. I remember several years ago listening to a podcast called Eat This, and they were talking specifically about cattle breeds in ancient civilizations and just how they were just nothing like the cattle that we've got now. And it's easy for us with our modern heads to think, oh, well, this is what a cow is. This is a meat cow. But very, very different. I also want to just mention again about ale, because we haven't talked about ale for a while on the podcast.
What's wrong with us?
I know, exactly. What's happened?
How could we?
And you mentioned earlier about how, Sumer, everyone wants to know about their ale, because obviously they had a goddess of ale, Ninkasi. And I've done experiments making barley cakes and using those cakes to make ale, which is kind of where I started in my ancient ale journey. There's a recipe in Sandor Katz's Wild Fermentation that you read it and it's kind of like, oh, this is a crazy recipe. But obviously I read it and I was like, it's a crazy recipe. I must do it. And there are 2 blog posts, which we will link in the show notes on my website. They kind of document that I started with this kind of ancient Sumerian barley ale made with barley cakes, and then sort of wheel through kind of where my research went next and how I moved on to later ales, how I moved using different kinds of things to actually start the fermentation, and then arriving at kind of English ale in the 1300s, 1400s, 1500s. And if anyone wants to know more about that, or actually have a go at making the ale, which some of the supporters of the podcast have using these blog posts, we will put them in the show notes because they're a good read. And also, if you want to make it and taste it, to kind of get an idea of what these ancient Sumerians would have actually been drinking when they drank ale, because it's very, very different to what we would call beer these days. You can go back and have a look at my blog posts. That was my little aside.
When I was a kid, I remember reading about Egypt, as one does, and we were horrified to learn about Egyptians would make bread and then they would crumble it up into water and it would ferment. Oh my gosh, we are clutching at our plastic pearls. And then you would take this special straw, which we have such straws from archaeology with kind of a filter in it, and drink it to sort of filter out the chunks. Oh, aghast. But now I'm like, what could be better?
Yeah, exactly.
That sounds genius.
Get me one of those straws.
Take me hands. Okay. Another interesting, the ale, we have a lot of people interested in the ale. So go check out those links. And this isn't something that you make ale out of, but another thing that comes up all the time in ancient history is the date. So there's a lot of things written about the date and the highly diverse date, which is from the date palm, was said to have a different use for every day of the year and 5 more besides. And when I thought about that, I thought that was kind of funny in English.
Yeah.
That there's a date for every day of the year. But historians say there are records of the date palm flourishing, if not being tended, all the way back to 50,000 BC. So apparently people have been loving dates for a minute.
So someone has to do that. Someone has to start a blog with all of those 365 plus 5 recipes, one each day for the uses of the date.
It would be very confusing. You could just call it a date for every day of the year, and nobody will know what you're talking about, except us. We'll be
reading.
Interested.
Yeah.
So jumping way forward in time to medieval times, Ruth Goodman, who is our patron historian of the podcast, she has a lot of interesting videos and commentaries, some books that you and I have about the medieval times. And she said something interesting about medieval peoples. She said you couldn't go buy veg in a market. You grew it. And it was always seasonal, so you would plant accordingly, of course, and forage where and what was allowed, which we all know. A la Robin Hood, sometimes you weren't allowed to take things from the king's forest, etc. So it's interesting thinking about, really making sure that your garden was layered, like you were saying. We have some winter crops right now. So there are things we can grow in winter, and they're, often more hardy and less plenteous than the spring, or not even spring, but like the summer and fall crops would be. And then, of course, spring is the starving time when there's the least amount of food. Interestingly, Allison, something I learned in Anglo-Saxon studies was that starving didn't actually mean going hungry. Starving basically meant dying. So if they called it the starving time, not necessarily just meaning, we were all really hungry, but also we were all dying of catarrh and dysentery and whatever setting in by the end of a long winter indoors with no plumbing. Okay. There is a book by Dirk van Loon called The Family Cow. And when you were talking about the cow, I was thinking about this book, which was already in my notes to mention, because he starts out talking about our very ancient cow, or if I'm pronouncing this right, the acor, as it was called. And he says exactly what you said. It's not what you're thinking about right now. It's nothing like that, plump, fluffy Jersey cow cranking out 2 gallons in the morning and 2 gallons after dinner with a half a gallon of cream besides. So when people say, man, people kept cows back then, what did they do with all the milk? Just remember that these modern cows are producing, even a Jersey cow is considered a heritage breed. And so her production isn't anywhere close to something like a Holstein, which might give you 8 gallons or more in a day. And so consider that people weren't getting that much. And then the cows were also working, of course, so a lot of metabolic activity. And then in the wintertime, nobody had big bales of hay stored up, big round bales wrapped in plastic. So they didn't milk them. It was just naturally assumed that the cow would be dried off in the winter. Dirk van Loon assumes in his book, which he wrote I'm getting the date right, it was in the 70s. He refers to things like the Great War. So, his language is slightly different than now. And he assumes that the reader probably doesn't have a refrigerator, because he says, if you have a refrigerator, you could put your milk in it. And he suggests alternately that you set the milk in a stream, or you put it down a well, which is what people used to do historically to keep things cool.
That's amazing. If you have a refrigerator in the 70s. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought that was also interesting. And remembering that his audience was likely going to be more rural if they're looking at keeping a cow. That is my favorite cow book, if anybody's wondering, and it's where I learned how to take care of a cow. So in episode 2 of the Tudor Monastery Farm show, Allison, I thought that you would find this particularly interesting, being as it's your people. So Ruth Goodman has a scene where she talks about the dairy. So a dairy being a place where you process and take care of and then theoretically store the milk. The dairy was a room or building, if you will, attached to the north-facing side of a house in the Tudor times. And this is interesting because the house is then shielding it from the heat of the sun. So all of my Charlotte Mason fans know that Miss Mason emphasizes in her first volume, Home Education, that we want the children's room on the south-facing side of the building where it's sunny. And of course, when she's looking at using natural lighting and fresh air and, other things, we don't have piped in air and we don't have light bulbs. She wants the children getting that nice natural light, like the little sun, little flowers turning to the sun. So then, of course, you want your dairy on the opposite side of the house to keep it as far away from that as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So that it's sheltered naturally. And then there were windows on the east and west sides so that there was a through draft pulling air across inside the building.
That's clever.
And then the floors were porous and unglazed tile, so they actually hold moisture. And Ruth Goodman demonstrated how you would pour water on the floor, and then these unglazed tiles hold the moisture, which slowly evaporates. As the moisture rises, the draft coming through the east-west windows pulls the moisture out through the far window so that more moisture is compelled to rise up from the tiles. And Bob's your uncle, you've got a chill in there. So the stone dairy sits, she said, at about 5 and 6 degrees Celsius, regardless of outside weather. And to translate that into American, that's about 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Mm-hmm. And all my dairy farmers know there's this modern cooling adage, 40 minutes to 40 degrees for milk. That's the ideal temperature for forestalling spoilage in dairy products.
Clever.
I thought all that was quite fascinating.
Yeah, so clever.
Yeah. And I am also thinking of all the way now to modern times, almost modern times and modern times. We have friends in Missouri who are a good example of, we'll say, like 17th and 18th century preservation and keeping food cool because they live in an Amish-built house. So there's no electricity in the house, no wiring. It's a different type of off-grid than we are, where we have wiring in the house, but we just have to turn it on ourselves. And what they do is they have a big pond and they cut ice and then they stock it in this ice house where it lasts all year. And then the food is adjacent to that, kept cold. And if you've read, there's books that I'm thinking immediately of the Catherine Worth book, They Love to Laugh, which is about Quakers in early America. And it's really good illustrations in that book if you want to see how a prosperous farm was being run with sheep and a loom and a big ice house, and so storage of meat and things like that year round, which is kind of unique. And then, of course, I also thought of Five Children and It, written by E. Nesbitt, where they're always referring to, there's a really humorous scene that is centered on a bunch of meat and pies in the pantry, where we would normally think of putting those things in the refrigerator. But as you and I were talking about the other day, Allison, pantries they tend to be, well, let's say we'll probably put it on the north side if we could. And not even just a dairy, but the pantry would be not heated and cold. And so a lot of times I see pantries are built in houses now. They're actually a closet in the kitchen. And they tend to be as room temperature as the rest of the house. Yeah. And so the thought of putting your meat in there might turn somebody's stomach. Yeah. But if you thought about walking into a cold garage where you can see your breath in the air, then you would think, yeah, that makes more sense.
So interestingly,
pre-refrigeration.
The supporter Amelia, who lives in Wales, who is the one who made the salt with the garlic scapes, her house is old, and she has a separate room sort of off the kitchen, which she uses as a pantry, which I think probably was the original pantry.
Yeah.
And when I went to visit her, and we cooked some lovely oat cakes, and she made a lovely soup, I went into the pantry, and it just, all of the stuff is in there that I would love to have a pantry like that. But it was cold, and it reminded me of my grandmother, my mum's side, so my maternal grandmother, who her first house that she had up until I was about, I think, 7 or 8, which was the family home of my mum when she was growing up. The kitchen had a coke burner in the corner that actually did the heating for the house, and she had a butler sink, a ceramic sink, an outside toilet downstairs, and she had a pantry like that was in a very cold part of the kitchen. The sun didn't come in that side, and it was walk in with the shelves and everything, and it was exactly that. It was much, much cooler. And so then, when I later read in like River Cottage books by Hugh Fernie-Whittinstall that you can keep meat after you've bought it in a pantry on a plate with a cloth over it, you don't have to put it in the fridge. I was like, what? But then when I remember my grandmother's pantry, well, yeah, I mean, it didn't run much hotter than a fridge in there. It really wasn't. And so you can understand why now, with a modern sensibility, when we read about keeping meat in a pantry, we're like, no, because we think of that, maybe that separate room kind of off the modern kitchen, which is the same temperature. We've got central heated places where everything's the same temperature. But pantries are very different not that long ago. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting how houses evolve with technology and with patterns, so to the point where living a ancestral kind of a life in a modern built house can feel very incongruent because you're always working against the way the house was built. And it can feel refreshing to walk into a very old house. And as you described Amelia's house with the pantry, you think, yes, this pantry suits the way I live and the way I work with my food.
Yeah,
I suppose
totally agree.
A little piece of me has always wanted to be ancestral because I don't like putting food away. Like putting it in the fridge.
Can I just say something else about that?
Please do. Yes.
This house doesn't suit me. It's really interesting. Last month we had a conversation on our kitchen table chat, which is the private podcast that you mentioned earlier for supporters, about our ideal fuel and our ideal kind of cooking materials and our ideal cooking stove. And it feels like for Rob and I, for a long time now, we've always got the cooker on, we've always got the hob on, and we're like, we should be using this heat to heat our home. This kitchen is like in the corner of the house. The stove is just tucked away somewhere, and we're living in another room. Not only do I want to see and talk to people in that other room, so I want them to be in the same room as me, but the kitchen's tiny, so they can't be. But also, that heat from my cooking could be used to create heat in the ambient space we're in. But because it's in a separate room, and our kitchens have been in a separate room, it just, all of that heat just disappears into nothing. And it feels like, the modern houses that we look at, they don't suit the way that we live and the way that we want to cook. They're completely inefficient for an ancestral way of life. They're probably efficient for people who just, heat up a pizza in the evening and are out at work all day. But it's totally what you're saying. I totally agree that these spaces don't work for someone who wants to live ancestrally. And when you start going into the lifestyle more, you look around and you realise, hang on, I want my house to be kind of different because this is not working. So I just wanted to talk a bit more about that because it's something we've talked about quite a lot, in the Discord with supporters and on the KTC chats, and it feels like it's quite an important thing about the way that we're living.
Everything down to the materials, and it has a big impact. Another book, Alison, you told me about this book, and you found a copy at a train station or something. You told me it's called The Diary of a Farmer's Wife.
Yeah, I was waiting for a train from Rob's mum's house into London, and there's all these books there that you can, give a donation to the air ambulance, I think it was. And I found this old book, absolute gem, and I think I gave £1 donation for it. But yeah, perfect for me. And then I told you about it, didn't I? And then you got a copy.
You told me about it.
Yeah.
It sounded amazing. I found a used copy of it and absolutely loved it. And there are so many references in this book to things being put in the pantry, chickens and hams and whatnot, which is just wonderful to read about. And she kind of reminds me sometimes of Nella Last. We were talking about her the other day. Their sort of snarky attitude towards her husband. And when I was flipping through it today, Allison, as I was just preparing for this episode, and I brought the book over so I could have it next to me. Do you know, I looked on the inside cover of the book, and where do you think this book came from?
Don't tell me it came all the way from England over to you.
The Stroud College of Further Education.
You're joking.
I'm not joking.
That's really strange. I mean, I wasn't even living in Stroud then when I got the book.
No, I think you were in Italy because you were flying back.
Yeah,
or you were taking the train back. Yeah,
wow.
Isn't that wild? I should have checked the interior. It would have saved you and Rob a lot of trouble.
Yeah, exactly. You could have just said, this is where you're meant to be.
There's also a tag from the Mid-Gloucestershire Technical College Library.
I wonder if that still exists.
I don't know. I don't know what either of those things are.
The story of that book, that it got all the way to an online secondhand bookseller in the States. Here? That's weird, isn't it?
The earliest checkout date was 20 February 1984.
Okay.
So just a couple days ago, anniversary for us recording. And the last checkout date was 22 March 2002.
Gosh, I wonder how that got to you. That would be a story, wouldn't it?
I don't know. Anyways, I kind of did a double take when I saw that name in there.
Yeah, I was surprised.
Yeah. So let's take another ad break and then come back and talk about some tools that will widen an ancestral pantry.
Are you looking for kitchen inspiration? Perhaps you're fed up with trying to make the recipes you find online suit your family. Would you like to try the dishes that we make in our kitchens every day? Andrea and I have penned 3 cookbooks that are there to support you to make ancestral food come to life in your own home. Meals at the Ancestral Hearth, our first cookbook, has 20 foundational ancestral meals, all of which come directly from our kitchens. Spelt Sourdough Every Day is my baby, taking you through how to bake a myriad of delicious ancient grain goodies. And the Pastured Pork Cookbook shares our love of this often overlooked meat, with over 35 recipes featuring heritage pork, offal and lard. Each book costs just $12, or you can get all 3 for $30, saving you $6. And all of the funds go directly to keeping us on the air. Head to ancestralkitchenpodcast.com/shop and get cooking.
There are tools you can get that enable you to do more with less processed versions of food. There are some, Allison, that you have, some that I have, some that neither of us has, but we would like, and some that both of us have. So what I wanted to talk about tools, I guess, and talk about what some ancestral tools might be.
Okay.
For a kitchen, just to make your pantry more useful.
Okay.
Even if you just have single ingredient items in there.
Yeah.
So what was kind of hilarious, Allison, when I first started doing research for this specific section, I thought, I'm just going to look on Google and see what they say for ancestral tools. And it just took me to your website, our website, and the podcast. So as long as millions of people are wondering what some ancestral tools might be, then I think you and I We're going to be millionaires,
So
Allison.
how do we make that a trendy? We need to make that a trending phrase, don't we? We make it trending.
Trending phrase, ancestral tools. So some tools that our ancestors may have used would include and not be limited to, because there's a lot of like wild tools out there. A quern, which is a stone grinding device, we'll say, hand stone grinding device for grinding grain. I've also seen, it's not a quern, but now that I've been watching more videos of ancestral Mexican cooking and the Diana Kennedy video that Brittany told me about, and looking at pictures and drawings of ancestral Mexican cooking, I also see, I don't know what it's called. If somebody knows, please tell me, but there's like a sloped stone device that you see women sitting at, grinding what looks like the masa, so the soaked corn, and then shaping it by that movement. I mean, they're moving so fast in these videos.
I don't know if it's
I've
the
watched
same as the chocolate one. It's called a kamal, the chocolate one.
I don't know.
And that's a similar thing in Mexico. They put the cocoa beans on there. And then to get those cocoa beans into a paste, to get them to release their fat, which takes a lot of work, it's a stone, like a big stone board, which has a kind of a concave shape to it. And then they've got a rolling pin like thing, and they go up and down and up and down and up and down, again and again and again. And Marcus, who we interviewed for the Chocolate Podcast more than once, has one of those in his home, and he has done chocolate making manually by putting all the cocoa beans on there and rolling it up and down, and it took him hours. And his muscles went up by 20% while he was doing it. But I think maybe it's the same one for the masa, but I think it's called
it sounds exactly the same. So I mean, it would be perfectly logical that the same tool could work for both, because the motion would be very similar. So somebody who's an expert, please tell us. Also, Allison, my mom said that she's listened to the chocolate episode 2 times so far. She really likes it.
Wow.
It's really good. If anyone hasn't listened to the chocolate episode,
you can get
it is kind of technical.
You can get more out of it, yeah, by listening
it's twice. Just really good. I found it just inspirational. Anyways, besides that thing that I don't know what it's called, there would be fermentation bowls, large bowls of different sizes, wide, shallow bowls for milk and cream and things like that. Fermentation bowls, that there would be crocks, wooden barrels, large wooden barrels that you could use for storing ale or salting meat in. And there was something called a food safe, which I really want to bring back the food safe. Like, if I can have something added to my kitchen, please let it be this. But picture, if you will, a large shallow wooden crate that hangs from your ceiling that you can pull down to the counter, take the food out, safe from the mice and the rodents and the cats and things that can't jump to it, and take the things out that you need, and then kind of pull it back up to the ceiling.
And probably dry out there as well, which would help, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
With the heat of the fire going up.
We talked about that in our Ideal Kitchen episode on the KTC. There could also be a bread box, a place for some people really complain that their bread goes moldy if they keep it in there for very long. But bearing in mind that something along the lines of like a fresh enriched bread that we're often making wouldn't be expected to last a long time. And a lot of we're thinking, how can I keep my food from, getting stale or moldy? Whereas other people were thinking, how can I keep the rats from chewing on this? So those are the different priorities. Ruth Goodman also demonstrates in a video that I've linked in the show notes a flour arc, which is something like, it looks like an early Hoosier cabinet, if Americans are familiar with that. And it's where you could kind of a built-in cabinet or chest against the wall where you could keep flour.
That's similar to the oats one, that there was a chest for keeping oats in.
That sounds like thinking.
A thing. Yeah, that was called an ark sometimes. It was called tons of other names, but it was called an ark, yeah.
I think an ark sounds pretty impressive. I would like to have something full of food called an ark in my kitchen. A mortar and pestle for grinding and combining and compounding, hanging iron pots, and
Dorothy Hartley, who is sitting on the chair next to me here, both her Food in England and Lost in Country Life. Well, I could be, but Lost Country Life. She has some really cool diagrams of those big cauldrons. When we think of a giant cauldron, we think of, the three witches stirring the stew or something. But she shows how inside of those cauldrons there would be different things hanging, like a bag of pudding. And
it's fascinating, those drawings. I love them. When you've got the one that's all layered with like the vegetables there and the pork there and the potatoes there. Just amazing.
Yeah. I think that in modern days, we're trying to recreate that when you look up Instant Pot recipes and people say, look, you can stuff these things and wrap this in foil and then put another one on the side. And I'm like, hey, bringing back the cauldron.
Yeah.
So I think that'd be a really fun avenue to journey down, learning how to cook over the open fire with the cauldron type cooking that Dorothy Hartley talks about. I'll link her books in the show notes too, because they are really, really, they're just incredibly good. You would also have, Ruth Goodman talks about having tools of different types of tools that you would use to move the wood around in your open fireplace so that you could get a different kind of burn underneath different things. Or, when your pot's ready to just go down to the low simmer, you don't turn the button to simmer, you just shift the coals over to underneath, like maybe where now your bread is or something. You would find a butter churn in many old dairies. Grease savers, I don't know when these came about, but certainly they were used up until, the mid-century. But I've only ever found one, and unfortunately it wore a hole in the bottom, and I couldn't justify keeping it for one of our moves. It is a metal container with a drop-in insert in the top that is like a little grate, and then it has a lid on top, and it says grease. And so when you are done cooking something on the stove, you can pour the grease through it, and any of the little particles and chunks are saved at the top. And all your grease in the bottom is just pristine and ready to use. I absolutely love it. And if anybody finds one, please tell me. I really want another one. You could also find butter presses, which I've collected a few old ones, and I really love the butter press for making different sizes of shapes of pats of butter, and also large wooden butter making pans and paddles. Julie, who is a listener of the podcast and a lovely friend, she's come over and canned with me before, and she brought over her grandma's, I think it was her grandma's, vintage bean slicer. And this is an example of how there are historically there are a lot of very, very unique niche tools. I know that modern cooks take a hit for having gadgets, but come on, a banana slicer. So the fact is, though, there are a lot of really cool niche gadgets that existed in the old days, because when you're going to do the job, you did the job right, and you did it completely, and you did it perfectly.
So tell me why you want to slice beans. Why would you want to slice a bean?
So it's like for green beans, right? So you
okay. I was thinking I'm just slicing a tiny, Borlotti bean or something.
No, that might be different. But this bean slicer is pretty cool. In the US, they're called like a French cut green bean, but I know they have other names. There's lots of specific tools, forks, tongs, pans, bowls, all different shapes with different purposes. And sometimes I find them in antique shops with the wrong label on them. And I go and I tell the vendor, hey, did you know this is actually a marrow scraper or whatever, So Nicole, who is a listener and supporter of the podcast, has shared with us this amazing picture of her grandparents' bread chopper, which is called a grommel. And I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. Allison, you said that Ash could put this in the website show notes.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So if you go to our website, ancestralkitchenpodcast.com, and go to episodes and look for this episode, you'll find more in the show notes than you get by looking through the podcast player. And that will be pictures of the bread slicer as well as the bread. And what is interesting, Allison, is again, she's describing a a way of life that
Yeah.
we don't do. So the bread, she showed the loaves of bread, which I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce these words, but I'll say Wincher Parlen. Just making sounds up
Okay.
now. She said that they were traditionally made with rye and sourdough in a specific bread trough, which I know you love and
Yay.
want,
Kneading trough.
as well as with typical local herbs like blue fenugreek. Nicole said a large batch of dough would have been made, and on local farms, the bread oven would be fired up. Then all the bread was baked. So this is something, again, everybody says, how did ancient people bake bread every day? They didn't. That's a lot of fuel. That's a lot of work. Some loaves were eaten fresh, but most of them would have been dried on racks that were put above the heat source in the communal living area. So natural dehydrator. Then a grommel was used to chop up the hard bread. This hard bread was a staple for the family and would often be eaten at least once or twice a day. My Oma and Opa would always drop pieces of the bread into their coffee, wait for them to soften, and then eat them with a large spoon. A pat of butter and often some jam were on the table in the bowls as well. You'd take a spoonful of coffee-soaked bread and put that in your mouth, but not yet start chewing. Then dip the same spoon into the butter and then into the jam so as to have both on your spoon, and then pop that into your mouth. And only then would you chew and savor all the flavors.
That's like the like the porridge, dipping the porridge into the bowl with the milk and making sure. What else is really interesting about this is that the reason that bread contraption to cut bread exists is because the bread was so hard. You couldn't just put a knife to it. You had to jam it on the bottom, and then it's like a guillotine almost. It comes down, But what was also interesting was that Nicole was reading it. I'm sure she won't mind me sharing this. She was reading a book on breathing, and in that book, the person who wrote it was explaining that bread used to be a lot harder than it was now, because we stored it for so long. And therefore, the muscles in our jaw and going up into our breathing kind of apparatus had to be a lot stronger to be able to chew that bread. And because of that, our breathing was better because everything was kind of fitter in that arena and, more developed and not so flabby. And therefore, we were able to breathe a lot more deeply than we can not having that now, which I thought was fascinating because it kind of links into the health in a way you wouldn't even have imagined,
Absolutely. And that was something that we started discovering when Gary and I went down the butchering path, because we started finding that, butchers would, there's this one butcher that we really enjoy his videos, and he shows himself making these different cuts, and he says, usually this piece is trimmed off, but I like to chew food. He says, I don't think all of our food needs to be the consistency of baby food and paste. He said, everybody always wants the tenderest, the softest, the melt in your mouth, but he goes, I wanted to actually chew it. And I think that's great. And this bread situation, I am totally in love with this. And again, hearkening back to the pantry and the bread box and how did people store bread and all these things, everybody says, how did people keep their bread soft? Well, they didn't.
Yeah.
They were trying it out until it was so hard you had to use a guillotine to cut it out and to soak it in your coffee. So when we're trying to create this Edenic sort of fantasy land of everybody had a fluffy loaf of bread and soft bread was available all the time, that just isn't the reality. And I know that we can end up by trying to reproduce that, which is actually a semi-industrialized version of an ancestral life, which is, how do I just have bread on hand all the time, soft, fluffy, never stale? Well, actually, we don't. That's part of it. Nicole goes on to say that nowadays it is hard to find fully whole wheat rye. I don't know how to pronounce these words, Allison. This
Give
is
it a
beyond
go,
my scope. Vinsker, as often white rye flour will be added in, and almost always they are made with baker's yeast. Sometimes there might be a portion of sourdough in them. She said that she's been wanting to recreate them with your recipe for everyday rye bread. She finally tried it and it worked. She's so excited. And I had asked her, when you see the picture, this will make more sense. I said, how does it work? And she said, because the bread is so hard, it's difficult to cut. So that is why the knife is attached to the board. I mean, guys, do not get your hand in this thing. It looks
Oh
dangerous.
gosh, no. Keep the kids away unless they know what's going to happen with that knife.
You wedge a piece of bread under the knife, and then that works as extra leverage to help chop the chopped bits. You then slide to the right in the covered corner. I want to eat this. I want to eat this. I want to cut it on her.
What's
grumble.
interesting, again, is that, Nicole's, we are fortunate to have Nicole as a supporter who happens to live in a particular area of Italy and knows the tradition of that area. And, I corroborate that with the research that I've done on oat bread in this country. There was a sort of a rack that was hung from the ceiling, again above the fire usually, to dry out the oat bread. The oat bread was hung over it. It was either little sort of thin bits of wood between two struts, or sometimes rope was used. The oat bread was hung over it, so they were pancakes, flat oat bread, because you don't rise oat bread. And they were hung there, and they were left there, and they dried. And, inns had these above there, and then if someone ate at the inn, they just reached up and got a bit of oat bread down and ate it. And households had them, they were left up there, and they were stored up there, and they went hard, and you carried on eating them. And it's interesting, that's just my little bit of research on oats in the UK. And Nicole is in Alto Adige, which is, kind of the German side of Italy, just a small area. And you think every area must have had a similar kind of routine. We've read about Scandinavia and how they made massive oat breads with holes in the middle and then put them through a kind of a pole up high and kept them there. And there was these kind of flat donuts of rye bread. I just think every area had this, it was just a normal way of making bread, a normal way of living, and a normal way of eating. And yet, like you said, these days, it's how do I keep my bread soft, and how can I make artisanal bread that's kind of in the style of, sourdough and, in quotes, old fashioned, but it's not, it's like our modern version of ancestral to kind of go somewhere in between and please both mentalities.
And then all the fluffers and the puffers and the preservers and everything that they put in bread to make it the way it is now. Yeah. Allison, you have a particular love for the kneading trough.
Oh, I do.
And
I do.
we must find kneading troughs one day. But a friend of mine, Brianne, I think I might have talked to you about this on the KTC when we talked about our dream kitchen. And Brianne had told me that she had gone to a friend's house, and this was when she was looking at natural materials for her own kitchen that she was building. And one thing that she just fell in love with about natural materials was this woman has a large stone counter, and she showed her the indent in the kitchen where the woman who lived there before, I believe it was, had kneaded her bread every single day.
Wow.
And I thought, wow, that is really interesting that, she was there kneading enough to make kind of made her own kneading trough on the counter.
Nice.
So there's a few of these tools that we use today. And in a modern ancestral kitchen, honestly, many of the tools are the same. And often we can and do even use antique or vintage tools. I go to antique stores not looking for novelties to hang on the wall, but actually looking for specific tools that I want to take back and use in my kitchen. And then there's also modern handmade replicas of things that are quite good, stone and bone and wood that can be carved into things to use in the kitchen. And there are a few conveniences that help us cope with the fact that a village mill or a fellow concubine to grind grain with you typically doesn't exist for moderns anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So these tools are what you and I use to help us get the most out of our bulk and very little processed foods.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just going to start right out with, at the top, mock mill.
Yay.
Grain grinder of some sorts. This is instead of the corn.
Yeah.
Ice cream churn. That's fun. That's more modern. That's not really ancestral, but it's a fun keeping out of the industrialized freezer department type tool. A pasta roller, which you have and I do not.
Yeah,
A flaker.
it's a manual one, just
Yeah.
wind it round with your arm and fill your whole
Yeah.
kitchen table with pasta. Yeah.
I have a manual one also, but it's just my rolling.
Yeah.
One day I will be so cool. And Lizzie shared in Discord amazing pictures.
gosh.
Did you see the pasta that
Yes,
she
I
made
did.
with her?
Just like
That didn't
seriously
even-
incredible.
I was just staggered. The jealousy that I felt was insane. That was awesome. I want to be able to try that someday.
Just imagine any pasta shape and it just comes out of this machine just like that.
Yeah.
And you can make it whole grain spelt, sourdough pasta, whatever shape you want. It's amazing.
What? It's really interesting how much I realize how luxurious things are. And an example of that is the butchering, where we didn't have a meat grinder, so we didn't have ground meat for a really long time. And I realized how much I missed it. I really wanted it. And I was really happy when we got one. And something like an ice cream churn, you don't have an ice cream churn, and then, yeah, you can have ice cream, but it's like kind of different, it's not all kind of the way that we want it to be. And then the pasta, well, we have lots of wide, flat noodles, but we don't have those fun shapes like she had, So thinking about how, as our tool library expands, that really is, to me, luxury and affluence. Oh, you have pasta in different shapes. Well, that that's pretty cool. Versus if you just go to the store and it's 99 cents for a different shape, you don't really even think about it. You don't go home and say, aren't we so lucky that we get pasta in this shape? I just can't believe our good fortune. We don't think anything of it. Something that you and I both have lots of: jars, swing top bottles, fixtures, tops, weights, things for the either canning jars that we use for fermenting things in. I have a pouring lid, which I got when we had the cow.
Yeah, I don't have one of those, and I've always kind of
No.
wanted one. I thought, oh, that would be nice, but I don't have one.
Yeah, I can't say I always wanted one because I didn't even know they existed. But when I saw the ones that have the handle on top and you can put it on a half-gallon jar, so I put it on a half-gallon jar of milk or whatever, and then it's got a kind of pop open lid that you can pour out of. It sure is nice. I love that thing. I also really like sprouting screens, like little stainless steel sprouting screens you can get for quart jars. And I have 2 sets of small fermentation weights that go into the mouth of a jar.
Me too.
Also, this is something, I didn't have this for years and years, so it's not like you need it, but it is something that I have found to just make my life that much easier, which is a kombucha screen or cloth. And you can use it I use it for kombucha, kefir, whatever I'm throwing in there. It doesn't really matter, but primarily I use them for kombucha, and they fit on a wide mouth jar. And I'll put the link in the show notes actually, because I do not remember the company that makes them, but they fit on a wide mouth jar, and I don't know. I always have you just use like a napkin or a towel and rubber band on top. But
So
I got
that
these,
just
I don't know,
stops
maybe 5 years
the
ago.
insects and dusts getting in, does it?
Yes.
Okay.
And then my rubber bands aren't breaking, and I just find I'm not spending my morning fiddling with the fabric and making it fit. You can also get airlocks that you can put. I've put them before, like back in Virginia, we punched holes in the top of metal canning lids and then put airlocks in them. Something that I like to use for storing bulk supplies of things is food grade 5-gallon buckets. And I also have like 3 and 2-gallon buckets, and then Gamma Seal lids for various sizes as well. The Gamma Seal lids are like a twist open lid that just makes it so much easier to get into the bucket. And I did not have those literally until we moved to this house. I had a couple of them, but I didn't have one on all my buckets. And every time I had to open the bucket, say goodbye to your fingertips. Hope you're not planning to type anything for a while because your fingers are going to be sore. And then you have to kind of smash it back down with the heel of your hand or the heel of your foot. And it was always kind of a tedium, but that was life, right? Well, then I learned that there's things called bucket openers, which are really handy. I have a metal one and a plastic one, 2 different ones that both were given to me. And I also have a rubber mallet for closing buckets. But then also most of my buckets have the Gamma Seal lids now. So again, just in the lap of luxury over here, scooping out my
we don't have any
stuffed grains.
buckets or any lids or any hammers. We just have the bags the grains come in.
Yes. And again, since we're keeping our grains in a garage, they aren't in our house.
Yeah.
And there's a fair concern of an animal could get to it or moisture could get to it.
Yeah, we don't keep any of our grains outside. So there's not the same need for us to have buckets for sure.
Yeah, you can just picture if you had to keep your grains on the porch, you'd be like, I don't know about this bag.
Yeah. It would go. I know. It would be ripped and all the grains were all over the floor. I'd be like, oh, whoops. Won't be doing that again.
Yeah. For the meat grinder, there's hand ones. I think you posted pictures before of Gabriel using one.
Yes.
And there's also electric ones. Those are really handy. No pun intended. Of course, mortar and pestle still turns up in our kitchen.
I have 2 of them. I have 2 of them. No, actually, I have 3, actually. I have 2 big ones and 1 small one. So the one small one I use, it just fits in a drawer really easily. And I just use it for spices. I used it for coriander seed last night. I made some gingerbread. And then I have 2 big ones because one of them I use for garlic and the other one I use for chocolate. And I kind of didn't want to put the 2 together, even though they're stone and I'm sure they possibly wouldn't, make the chocolate taste of garlic. But I still thought, no, I want to keep a separate one for my chocolate. And I've got a lovely, beautiful marble one that we bought when we were in Italy from Carrara, where they have the marble quarries.
Oh, it's fine. She's a Carrara marble mortar and pestle that she just went to Italy to get.
Right, exactly.
It's no big deal.
Yeah. And I just happened to be living there, and
just
then
one time.
I also have a granite one, a black granite one, which has a rougher exterior, which I use for the chocolate.
Okay.
So yeah.
I love those really big ones that I see in pictures that you can make, guacamole or something. I have a small one that I use for spices or tea, things that I'm, grinding up like that. And then I just found, I didn't realize I had, but I have like a tiny one. I don't really know what it would be for. If you could grind a pill or something.
Oh, wow. That's small. Gosh, I've not seen them.
Yeah. So I feel like it's so small. How could you get any leverage on this thing? But now I'm remembering Marcus talking about buying the very expensive, was it the Kamal that he was talking about?
I think so,
when
probably.
He said he brought a very expensive stone.
Yes.
In my head, I think I was picturing the mortar and pestle.
No, he meant the flat one.
He said it's really hard to get them.
Yeah.
Because they break. Yes. Stone, right? And so people don't really sell them and ship them. So you kind of have to go to South America and carry it home on your lap. So he did build up his muscles just getting it home.
Yeah.
Dough cloths. Gotta have our dough cloths. I like my dough whisk. I've gotten really attached to it.
Okay.
And canning pots. I know you don't can, you said. But I find for my pantry, it definitely helps me having a canning pot, jars, lids, and reusable canning lids on hand.
Mm-hmm.
So those are just a few tools for making your pantry do more work. Let's take another ad break, Allison, and then come back and talk about what is in our pantries right now.
Hey, you washing the dishes. Been there. You've heard Allison and I talk over and over about her love of rye sourdough bread. Well, I might actually call it an obsession, but that's neither here nor there. Now you can make Allison's rye sourdough in your own kitchen with her as your teacher. And she's a really good teacher. Rye is economical, it's delicious, and full of nutrients and low in gluten. There's a reason why it has been a darling of bread bakers for centuries. Make it into sourdough, as Allison will show you in her course, Rye Sourdough Bread, Mastering the Basics. And you've got an amazing, tasty, and nutritious staple in your kitchen. It's traditional and it's nutritional. In this course, you'll learn everything there is to know about how she creates and maintains her rye sourdough starter, all about whole grain sourdough rye, including the key differences between baking with rye and wheat, how to make 2 loaves, an everyday rye sandwich bread, and a delicious Russian-style dark rye loaf, and what to do with your sourdough discard, including video walkthroughs for sourdough pancakes and a tasty, sweet, spiced cake. Head to www.ancestralkitchen.com/rye.
So what's in the pantry, Allison? We've got good lists written out if you really want to know everything. We wrote out lists in our cookbook, Meals at the Ancestral Hearth. Of course, that was a snapshot of our pantry at that point in time. And I know
Yes.
both of our pantries actually look quite different now, because mine is getting narrower and narrower, which we'll talk about, and that's by intention. And yours is now a British pantry, not an Italian pantry. So they are a bit different. So do you want to talk a bit about what you have in your pantry right now?
Yeah. Okay. So
Dry goods wise, at least?
we don't have a separate pantry. So basically, I'm just talking about dry good wise, what's in my cupboards. And it's
So
not
it's all in the
kind of a
kitchen?
separate room. It's not all in the kitchen.
Okay.
It's in the kitchen, and it spills out from the kitchen into a cupboard which is just outside the kitchen, which handily
Isn't it just-
fit in the space.
I know how that goes.
And then that
Yes.
spills out further into the cupboard under the stairs, where the really big bags are, because we don't go in there very often. You have to go right down the bottom, and then you have to crouch because it's under the stairs. And we've got so many things in there because the house is so small. We've only been here a while, and it's hopefully not. It's just a stopgap, but it's not big enough for us.
Yeah.
So I don't go down the bottom of that cupboard. I don't want to know what's down there. Rob goes down there, gets the stuff, brings it out.
I want to see.
Exactly. So in our cupboards and overflow cupboards, as I will call them, the dry goods we have are mainly, grains. So we've got spelt. We buy that in 15 kilogram sacks, which is more than 30 pounds, I think. Rye, the same. Then we've got smaller bags of Emma, and then also quite a few gluten-free grains, because I'm eating gluten-free and because we eat them often for supper in the evening. So we've got millet, we've got buckwheat, we've got oats, and we've got rice. Those are all berries because I'm using the mock mill to grind them. Whether I'm making them into a porridge, or I want them a little bit smaller, or whether I'm putting them into a bread, they're always ground in the mock mill. I do have oatmeal, which is more kind of a flour that's been ground already by a stone mill in the UK. And then because I'm making a lot of gluten-free bread at the moment, I've got a big bag of potato starch. I don't keep many pulses because we don't do so well on pulses, but I do generally have 2 or 3 small bags of pulses that I will add into a minestrone, or some other kind of stew that I'm making. So besides kind of a few jars which are in the fridge, that's our dry goods store, and it's all in the original bags that it came to us in, with lots of elastic bands, because that's how I close the bags. We always never have enough elastic bands, and then Gable comes and steals my elastic bands out of the drawer, and then I look back
and
and
you
I'm
find
like, where are the elastic
14
bands?
wrapped around a pencil somewhere.
Yes, exactly.
Like, what are you doing?
Pinged across the room to the corner, and I'm like, oh, it's broken now, I can't use it. Anyway, lots of elastic bands, and most of them, because like the ones that we keep in that cupboard under the stairs, we decant a good amount into a large container in the cupboard at any one time. We've usually got like maybe 4 kilos, 3-4 kilos of spelt, 3-4 kilos of rye in Tupperwares in the cupboard. So I don't have to keep going back into that cupboard under the stairs. But it's all really easily accessible to me, in either just outside the kitchen or in the kitchen. How about you? Your pantry was kind of bigger, I remember, from dry goods when we did Meals at the Ancestral Hearth. Yeah.
Yeah, and it wasn't necessarily, and isn't necessarily, variety that I ever intended to maintain, but it was also part of a merger when a friend moved and she gave me her pantry, and she had kind of different varieties of things than I usually keep, but big buckets of them. Like, not like she gave me a little bag, she gave me 5 pounds of rye
Mhm.
groats or whatever
Mhm.
they're called. And so some of the things as we use them, we're not necessarily replenishing them. And as you know, Allison, I'm kind of on this hard kick right now to just
Yeah.
use things out of our pantry. I don't want to buy anything. I don't want to bring anything in. I want to be forced and pushed into more creativity by just limiting myself, if you will, to what's in the pantry. And limiting is probably a ridiculous phrase to use because I have not run into anything yet that I can't make.
Yeah.
So my pantry is pretty wide.
Amazing.
I just got this new gluten-free cookbook
I saw the
recommended
picture
by
on Discord.
multiple listeners. Yeah, I am so excited. I thought and thought and thought and thought about getting it, and I thought, like, well, do I want to be doing gluten-free baking? Like, I mean, I'm happy not baking anything, but then finally I thought, oh, I just love baking so much.
Yeah.
I want to get a gluten-free baking book. So, and some of them just use so many gluten-free baking books use lots of, complex branded blends and things like that. And this book uses real ingredients.
Excellent.
So I bought it and I was reading through it. I was like, what does it say about me that I can make everything in this book? Like we have the things, the weird things, but what I want to do is use them up. Like I have
Yes.
tons of types of tea, but I just keep buying the one tea that I really like. And I was like, okay, don't buy it. Just finish using these other teas and then go back and buy the other tea.
Mhm.
So lots of things, but we keep a range of both gluten and gluten-free grains. Right now, I've only been gluten-free for a couple of months, and so we still obviously have a significant store of, regular gluten flours and grains. And so using those up concurrently, but gluten and gluten-free grains as well as some flours. I don't like to keep loads of flours on hand though, because you and I have both experienced that doesn't go so well.
Yeah.
We have a fair range of dried pulses, so peas, lentils, beans, and I've also periodically I just go through and I soak 5 pounds and I can them, and I'll make a couple batches of that so that we always have some canned beans on the shelf just for quick instant use. I like to keep let's see, I'm trying to think what we really keep primarily. One thing, Allison, that
Yeah.
burning through the pantry is bringing to light to me is how many things I really don't care if I ever buy again. And then the few things that I think, okay, I
Yes.
do want to make sure we have this. And what is that? And then, as you and I have talked about before, the narrower my pantry gets, I don't need to have a one-stop shop because I need a one-stop shop if I'm buying 5,000 different items.
Yeah.
I don't need a one-stop shop if I'm buying 5 different items. I'm okay with having 5 different vendors for those 5 high-quality items. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel the same. I mean, we don't buy all our grains from the same suppliers. We have at least 3 I can think of off the top of my head. But, talking about narrowing that pantry, I was thinking of the example of millet. And, I've used millet this week. People who've listened to the millet episode, go back and if you haven't listened to it, listen to it. But they know that I use millet a lot. But I've used millet literally just this week to make boza. I've also cooked it in chicken stock. I've ground it and put it into a bread. And then a couple of nights ago, the boys went out with Rob's mum to Stroud, and I thought I want to do them something nice when they come back because it was rainy and horrible. And it was going to be millet, but I fried some onion in oil and then put some spices in there, some cumin and some coriander, and I can't remember quite what else, but something along Nigella, I think, along those lines, always the Nigella. And then I put the millet in as if I was doing a risotto. I put the millet in and let it cook in the fat and the onions for a little bit. And then I put in half stock and half canned tomatoes. And it was so delicious, but yet so different to using the millet for boza or using the millet for bread or just cooking millet in stock, and just that one grain. There are tons of other things. I could put it in a soup. I could cook it into a kind of a biscuit or a cracker. There are so many different things I could do with it. And we've talked about this a bit before, but I think the narrower you have your pantry, the more your brain has to fire up and kind of come up
I
with
agree.
simple and yet creative ways that you can use the same grain. And then it's not like, oh, we're having millet every night, because it's just a different dish. It's wonderful.
Absolutely. And somebody might hear us talking about narrowing the pantry and say, but wait a minute. Allison was over here on this episode talking about how there was all these different types of pigs and all these different types of grains, and they had different uses and different purposes. And that all is true. Those you realize more by adhering closer and closer to seasonality and regionality. So you start to realize, oh, this cultivar really works here and it doesn't work over there. Instead of trying to keep all 6 of them in my pantry, I'm going to focus on the one that's near me.
Yeah.
And, maybe this animal is only kind of harvested at this time of year, whereas that animal is harvested at that time of year. We're going to focus on that. So narrowing the pantry is, I'll say, in a sense of abandoning industrialized principles of food, where there's thousands and thousands of choices. And kind of ironic, Allison, that in the thousands and thousands of choices in the grocery store, go in there and shop for those thousands of options, but don't buy any soy, don't buy any wheat, and don't get any corn. And suddenly you're like, okay, there's not that many options left. So it's ironic that we have this representation of all these choices, but really it's kind of the same thing in different boxes. And that is kind of how I'm looking at my pantry, in the sense of, how can I not be bringing in things that I have to work extra hard to get in? Like, everybody beware. I'm about to say something you probably didn't think you'd hear on Ancestral Kitchen podcast. Our butter consumption has gone down by 90%. That's because I have a lot of lard and a lot of tallow in my freezer. Butter, I have to take the cream off the top of the milk and churn it and wash it and pat it and then, freeze it or put it in the fridge. And then we have to use it within a certain amount of time because it does spoil. And or I have to buy it. And to buy the quality that we're buying is pretty expensive. Lard is expensive too. So it's, the economics are going to come out for somebody somewhere. Like, I'm just saying, for me, what's falling out is that butter is just not the most natural choice for us to rely on for the majority of our saturated animal fats. For us, it just tends to be lard and tallow are more economical where we are. And that won't be true for everybody. But what I mean is, I still love butter. Believe me, I love butter, and butter's good and all those things, but it just isn't our primary fat. And as I'm narrowing my pantry, instead of saying, oh no, I must keep butter on hand at all times. Oh, maybe I do, maybe I don't. But what I have right now is a few packages of butter that I'm going to wait until the day that I absolutely have to have butter for something. And astonishingly, I'm not needing it. Like, I'm running into pretty much everything I can handle without butter right now. So,
and what are you, just interesting, what are you putting on your bread? Are you putting that butter on your bread, or you're not? You're spreading lard on your bread?
See, I haven't been making bread.
So okay.
That's
you haven't
part
been making
of it.
Gluten-free bread. Okay.
I would be happy to try lard on bread, but
you should.
We just haven't.
With some salt.
And I want to make a whipped tallow, like with herbs, and try that, because when I was putting that, just using that for making like potatoes and whatnot, oh, so good.
Yeah.
But I think in my head, oh, if I'm going to make bread, that would be a time I would love to pull out some butter and indulge in it. And then I'll know how much of a luxury it is.
Yeah.
But for all other things, lard and tallow are serving.
It's interesting because
that sense, it's narrowing.
Because we've just done a week that was dairy-free. I'm just kind of wanting to see some observations of what happened in Gabriel, but also in both of us either. And just doing something where we've talked about this before, where you take a break from something and then you come back to it. It gives you so much perspective, and it also changes your taste buds up. And so when you come back to, you're like, why was I using butter for that? When it costs us, 5 times the price of the lard. when I could be using this beautiful lard here. And it just, whether you're narrowing your pantry or whether you're just taking a break from something for a little while and getting more perspective, it's easy for us to get stuck in ruts and think that this has to be done with this or this has to be done with that.
Absolutely.
But coming off a dairy-free week made me realise, you know what? I think I want lard on my bread today, not butter, because I've just been used to it for a week. And the same thing kind of happened when I moved from Italy to England. We relied much more heavily on olive oil in Italy because it was, literally coming from the trees around us, and it was much cheaper than it is here. And coming back here, I still want olive oil in my kitchen. And, it's one of the things that we have in our pantry. It's not dried, but we have it in our pantry. But our use of it is very different to how it used to be in Italy. So it's kind of a mirror of, you're switching to lard and tallow. There's been changes in those fundamentals in our kitchen as well over here.
Yeah. And I mean, it's things like, the Greek and Italian diaspora that sort of bring us, olive oil in Washington State. Like what?
Yeah.
But it is things like that also illustrate, okay, if I grew up in Italy, I'm going to be yearning maybe for that olive oil. I mean, unless I grew up in 1920, which one? Then we know I probably never seen it
in a place that never had any olive oil. You'd be yearning for lard.
They said yearning for lard, Alison. That could be the title of our next memoir, Yearning for Lard. But the idea that, I want to try to bring that food of my memories and replicate it or duplicate it, that brings food to different places where it might not normally have been. And what I find is I don't need to have the olive oil, the butter, the coconut oil, I don't need to have all the things. They're all good things, and they pop up from time to time in the pantry, but I don't stock olive oil. If I'm given olive oil, which has happened now 3 times, you gave me olive oil, my sister gave me olive oil, and Justine gave me olive oil, then I have olive oil. But then when it's gone, it's gone. And I don't really go back and, I'm not going to spend a high amount on it when I know, well, I could use lard for this, Yeah. So, so that's some of the things that we keep in our pantries and some of the ideas behind it. I feel like the ideas behind it are more important than the actual things that are in the pantry.
Yeah.
Because for each person, it's going to be quite different. If you're in South America, you're definitely going to be having different varieties, types, uses, applications, and processing methods for corn than somebody will up in Alaska, where they're going to have salmon more nights of the week than you ever thought were possible. So, but focusing, the more I focus every week on just, if I can't get it here, then it's not coming in. Then I just feel like my brain is expanding like a lot of ways.
It does. It creates space. It really does. I feel much calmer when there are fewer things in my pantry.
Calmer. That's exactly what it is. The fatigue of choices.
Yeah. Yes.
Last night, again, I when we had our live call with the supporters. So we do a live call once a month on the 3rd Saturday, typically, except for in the summer. But we do a live call with everybody, and it's kind of unhinged sometimes. And it was really fun. I was talking about this pantry thing because it's obviously very much on my mind. And I just felt I said, sometimes I'm just really tired. But then, well, you gotta go put some ingredients into food. There's nothing really to grab. And with as many hungry people as there are around here, there's oftentimes not a lot of leftovers. It's not like I can just go get something out and heat it up because it all disappeared at mealtime. So sometimes that, you and I both talked about in many episodes how sometimes you're like, well, I just want to eat something, but I guess I got to work for it. Darn it. But it is good. It is good. And I do feel calmer as I see, hopefully, my choices dwindling down.
Yeah.
Allison, the cats knocked a jar down the other day, and I
Okay.
thought, this is just a sign. The shelves are too full. The cats are knocking some. There's chia seeds of all things. Come on.
Gosh. Oh gosh,
course
I haven't
they're
had
not gonna
them
chia
I haven't had them for a very long time.
Sorry, did I bring you back to the raw vegan?
Brought me back to
taste
raw
of
vegan.
zebra?
Yeah, you just shooed me back in time to raw vegan. Yes.
Another weird little thing that is changing for us a little bit is we don't have an indoor refrigerator right now. We haven't since November. And that is not to say we don't have any refrigerator, because we have 2 refrigerators on our deck. So it's not like, oh no, she doesn't have a fridge. And then we also have the balcony where the fridges are. It's pretty cold out right now, so I just kind of set things in bins out there. But I was talking to Rachel about this the other day, and I was telling her every day I want to get a little bit closer to not being so reliant on all the electricity and the power and everything. And I often think about the refrigerators, and they take a lot of power. And I think, refrigerator culture is new. Like, this is a modern invention, and we've our entire lives have adapted to fit around living with a refrigerator. Like, kitchens don't have pantries anymore and things like that. And we buy food differently. We shop differently. We don't garden because you can just get it and put it in the fridge all week. There's your lettuce. So I told her, having the refrigerator, first of all, we've took it out of the kitchen some time ago. We never have a fridge in our kitchen. We always take it out because then I like having the space. And so it'll usually be in the dining room. Well, that's where our fridge is now. And then it stopped working. So then I just was using the fridge on the balcony. And I told her, every time it moves a little bit farther away, I realize again how I've adapted, and my routines, my habits, and the way I'm even thinking has adapted. When you have to walk the incredibly long distance of across 2 rooms and out a door and onto a balcony and get into the fridge, you don't just grab one thing and walk back in. Like, I might take my cup out with me and pour the milk into it out there and come back inside. And then I have little stashes on the counter. There's this corner of the counter where I pile my little fridge pile, and sometimes I'll say to a kid, can you just go put everything out in the fridge? And I got to be careful when I say one of the kids put it in the not working fridge. And I was like, no, that's not gonna work. But just thinking, I told her, I was telling Rachel, I don't think I want the fridge in the kitchen at all, or in the house at all anymore. I don't like the sound. It's like a fan whirring, and I don't want to see it. I'm turning into a diva. But I mean, it'd be fine if the fridge is in the house. I'm not going to complain about it. But also, I'm perfectly happy for it to stay outside. So we'll see what happens.
And I'm thinking now that fridge doesn't work anymore. And whenever there's a fridge that doesn't work anymore in our house, we turn it into a proofing box with some kind of piece of equipment that looks like a bomb that Rob made, which actually is not a bomb and is relatively easy to make. There's a blog post on my site from a long time ago about how to make a DIY proofing box. And yeah, literally, we're always on the lookout for what space can we put this DIY proofing box in? And of course, it's not just for bread. You can put your milk kefir in there, you can put the boza in there, you can put the kvass in there. Everything can go in there. And so, whenever there's a fridge that stopped working, I'm like, proofing box, can't get that over here.
No, that's a really good idea. Well, we can't close the doors because it will mold, right?
Yeah.
Probably. So I've got it kind of hanging ajar. And at some point, I mean, it was sitting there for months, and suddenly I was like, yeah, I could just put things on the shelf.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like a cupboard.
It's a cupboard.
So I started stacking things in there.
No, we've wherever a property we've been in is in Rob's mum's house when we lived there when Gabriel was born. There was a fridge that was part of the fitted kitchen that stopped working years ago, and it was just a cupboard, and we called it the fake fridge. And you put this in the fake fridge, please.
Yeah,
but
I love it. Okay, Alison, the $1 million question.
Yes,
this is what everybody wants to know. This is asked more times than I can keep track of. Soup. Did you leave it on the counter overnight? Do you eat it the next day, or do you throw it away?
Oh gosh, now that is the $1 million question. I'd say it depends what's in the soup and the state of that thing when it went into the soup.
I'm going to give you 2 different soups.
Okay.
First, a minestrone. You've got beef, some noodles, or not noodles, some beans, some veg broth. You left that out overnight. You came down in the morning and found it. Do you eat it or do you toss it?
What temperature has my kitchen been overnight?
It's summertime.
Summer,
so
I probably wouldn't eat it. No.
Okay.
If it was winter
How about
time,
November?
if it was winter time and I knew the house had been cold, depending on whether we'd had some form of heat on and how long it had been on for and what time the day before, I may eat it. But Rob is very risk adverse. And so he's much more kind of like, we can't eat it. I'm like, it'll be fine. So I might have to have a little sort of heated discussion with Rob.
Heated or unheated?
Yeah, a heated discussion with Rob about it, because he tends to be more cautious than I am.
See, Rob is not being unreasonable. We might be thinking, if I throw this out, that's $10 of whatever or more. He might be thinking, if we eat it and we get sick and something happens.
That's what he's thinking, exactly. And
the loss and the expense accrued.
We have had food poisoning, each of us. I've had it worse than Rob, and Gable had about, which I think maybe we've talked about when we first moved to Italy, and he was so ill. I mean, like, so ill. It was scary because he was a little kid and he couldn't even keep broth down, and
I remember that.
We were feeding him like water.
So you give him
we talked about it on one of the KTCs, teaspoons of water. Yeah, every 5 minutes. And it was terrifying. And having been through that kind of changed my perspective a bit. It's not just me now, and it's other people as well. It's my son. And Rob is exactly thinking it is not worth the risk of getting ill, because if we get ill, like I said, we're having like 3 or 4 days where we can't work, as opposed to throwing that out, which is not 3 or 4 days worth of finances. I just hate throwing things out. I hate it. And so I tend to mostly go with him, because I think if you
force him to eat it and he gets
ill and we get ill, I will really be upset about that. So I think I'm more cautious than you are, I think, when we've talked about this before, in that we throw things out. The way that I stop that happening is when I think the day before, when that soup's cooking, I've got to remember to put that in the fridge tonight. I know that I'm not going to remember when I've been sitting on the sofa for an hour listening to Sherlock Holmes read to me and I'm exhausted.
Holmes, yeah.
I'm just going to go, let's go to bed. I have to put an alarm on. I've got a little timer several timers on my kitchen fridge, one of which came from you, which has multiple timers, so I can be multitasking with all my timers. But I will put a timer on, and that's the only way to do it. And I have to do it when I remember, because if I think, I'll put the timer on later, I don't put the timer on.
Nope.
So generally I'm quite good at not forgetting and leaving things out, because I use timers. So what about you? Would you leave the minestrone out and eat it the next day if you'd left it out on the stove all night with beef in?
Yeah, I probably would. So the things that factor into that is, for one, our kitchen is always colder. It's fairly cold. Our house is fairly cold, especially in the wintertime. Our house isn't like a thermostat temperature warm. But also sometimes I just put the lid on it and set it outside.
Okay, I've done that before.
Balcony where it's cold.
Yeah.
Learned that from my Finnish friends. And I would just heat it up. I'd just bring it back up to a boil, and there we go. Yeah. There are things that are not palatable after staying out, and your nose immediately tells you that there's no point in saving it. So I wouldn't do it to the point of stupidity, but
something like porridge I would leave out, and sometimes I do leave out, because porridge was left out by our ancestors in a drawer for a week, and so I would not have any qualms about eating a porridge that had been left on the counter 24 hours. at all.
Yeah.
But it's when there's meat
That's
involved
interesting.
that I'm less sure.
Yeah. Would you, if you had one of those cold pantries like Amelia's, would you put, say you had a half a roast chicken left over, would you put it in there and lay a linen over it and come in and eat it the next day, or no?
If I knew what the temperature of the pantry was and I was happy that it was very cold, then
Yeah.
I would, yes. Whether Rob
The
would
other thing that comes
be
to
happy.
mind when we say, oh, you said Rob.
I don't know whether he'd be
Rob
happy
wouldn't.
or not. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, life's all about little compromises, is it not?
It
The other
is.
thing to think about is you and I have discussed at length the wider range of gut bacteria that people would have. So something I learned just interestingly from doing these gut tests that Gary and I did is things like E. coli and different forms of strep, they live in your gut.
Yeah.
They're there.
Yeah.
There's all kind of different strains and different things do different
It's about
things.
the balance.
But exactly, it's about the balance. And are they proliferating and taking over, or are they so low that because the rest of the body is keeping them in balance? And anybody who has inoculated yogurt or kefir knows exactly what this is like.
Yeah.
If you took an old soured milk and you threw in some kefir grains, and then if you waited for that to turn into a delicious kefir, you would find that the grains you were inoculating it with were already overwhelmed by the pathogenic and decomposition kind of bacteria that were taking over that milk. And when people ask me, oh, I have old sour milk, can I just ferment it? Then I always tell them, I would start with your freshest, sweetest milk for fermenting, because the old sour milk is so full of replicating bacteria that at this point, you might have a hard time taking it over with whatever inoculation you're trying to put in there. So yes, it's all about the balance. And rest assured, Allison, if you came over, I would not feed you soup I left out overnight.
Thank you. That's kind.
Because there's also the histamine issue, and that's another complex thing to consider.
Yeah.
The histamines would be also replicating as fast as the bacteria were. So, well, I feel like we kind of covered everything that I wanted to get up in this episode. This was really fun, Allison. I feel like I thought about this because the Ancestral Pantry, what people kept, how they kept it, informed how they ate and what they ate, the timing of eating, the speed, the rapidity of eating, the food vendors and ancient Sumer, and the straws in ancient Egypt, all the way up to our modern day. If you have the time, I have about 10 minutes left before the baby's going to be coming down. Then after we end this main feed episode, I wanted to record a after show with you and ask you, what are some of the things you used to keep in your pantry that you don't anymore?
Skeletons in my cupboard.
That's what I want. Okay, cool. Well, let's do that then, Allison. All right. Thank you. And it was lovely.
Thank you.
If you'd like to support the podcast, you can join as a patron. Choose from various levels starting at $5. You can see what we offer at ancestralkitchenpodcast.com.
While you're there, check out our favourite books, supplements and kitchenware, or give a one-time donation.
Leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts.
And if you know someone who would love our show, tell them about us.
You are helping to bring ancestral food wisdom into modern kitchens, changing the world one plate at a time.